Hello, good evening. It's 7:15 here in Calicut, a considerably warmer day than what it was for a few days. So today, I think I'll briefly discuss how we understand language acquisition on the basis of what linguistics tells us, right? So let's look at what this phenomenon called language is. So, behaviorists, people who operated in linguistics before Chomsky and others, would say, behaviorists who formed the core of structuralism in linguistics would say that language is largely a cultural phenomenon, something that you acquire from your surroundings. Okay, so how do you do that? You listen to people speaking, you imitate them, and then, over a period of time, you acquire language, every single bit of language that you use by imitating others. This was the long cherished theory, which everybody uh, acquiesced with. Yeah. So this is what till uh, the people who espoused the innate theory of language, which means language is already there in your brain. It is wired into your brain. It's biologically inherited. Okay. So the term innateness is when you're talking about language is attributed to a person, a philosopher, a linguist, mathematician, many things rolled into one. His name was Hilary Putnam, uh, uh, the son of a well-known philosopher, linguist, and Hilary Putnam was the first person to use this term, innateness of language. But it became famous through Noam Chomsky, again, a multi-faceted personality, philosopher, political thinker, linguist, mathematician. So, uh, Chomsky contested this idea that language is simply a cultural phenomenon, something that you acquire after you are born, something that you entirely acquire after you are born. In fact, it sounded plausible because uh, the behaviorists, including the arch behaviorist called Skinner, Jeff Skinner, Skinner said that if you imitate people speaking, okay, you can even expect a certain kind of reward. There is a reward mechanism. What is that? Which is if you imitate people successfully, you are recognized. Think of a child. When a child uses language, there is all-round appreciation. Yeah, you're understood. Your ability to communicate is recognized. So this is what we call the reward that you get while performing. So that's what I wanted to say. Uh, Too, besides language acquisition, language use. Here also, linguistics has many things to offer us. Okay, let's start with language acquisition. All right. So Chomsky said that language is not something which is cultural, entirely cultural. Language is a biological entity, something that is wired into your brain, right? Something that you inherit from your parents. So the next question would be, so do you mean to say that if you are born to Malayali parents, you inherit Malayalam? Or if you're born to Tamil parents, you inherit Tamil. Or if you're born to Hindi parents, Hindi speaking parents, you inherit Hindi. Well, that's not the case. So what's happening? Let's look at the problem closely. Chomsky said that there is something called language acquisition device in your brain, which you call LAD, language acquisition device. So what does this mean? This means that there is a device in your brain, like for various other things, which enables you to acquire language. All right. So already we know that there is a particular language area in your brain. Okay. Areas like Broca's area, Wernicke's area, etc. in your brain, where language is located. Okay. So if something happens to this area, your linguistic ability is sometimes very seriously impaired. Okay. So therefore, you have the phenomenon called aphasia, inability or partial inability to use language effectively. We have seen that already. Okay. So Chomsky would say that there is this particular device in your brain, okay, where, as we know, language would be located, and where the whole process of language acquisition is centered. Okay, so what does Chomsky mean by saying that language is innate, that language is largely a biological entity? What it means is that this phenomenon called language is wired into your brain. It's a genetic property, like so many other things, because you're not born with no ability at all. You are born with many things which you are able to perform naturally. Okay, because it is in your genes. Okay, that you eat, that you excrete, that you perform movements. All these are in your genes. Okay, so here, not exactly in your genes. In this case, in the case of language, it is wired into your brain. Okay, so which means that language acquisition is uh, something that happens in the initial stages of the development of your brain. All right. So, to understand this, let's look at another important principle which Chomsky formulated, something called universal grammar. What is universal grammar? Universal grammar is the set of grammatical rules which are common to all the languages of the world. Okay, so several properties of language, such as, for example, parts of speech. You don't have only nouns. You have verbs, the adjectives, adverbs, connecting words, prepositions, conjunctions, etc. So all these are part of language. All right. Any language, any language. There is no language in the world which does not have this division into parts of speech. There is no language in the world in which you cannot ask a question. Of course, you will say that all cultures require questions to be asked. But wait a minute. There are only a few ways to ask questions. Chomsky and others identified three ways of asking questions. One is a straightforward WH question, like, what are you doing today? Okay. Vaigitanda paribadi. How do you feel? How do you like this place? When do you plan to go, etc. All those words which, all those questions which require a factual answer. Okay, like I'm going tomorrow. I'm planning to go tomorrow. I like this place very much. Okay, വൈകിട്ട് പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് പരിപാടിയൊന്നുമില്ല, etc. As answers to all these questions, right? So that is one way. The second way is to uh, pose a yes or no question, which means the answer to this question would be yes or no. There cannot be a third answer. Okay. First, forget that joke about നിങ്ങൾ ഇപ്പോഴും അമ്മയെ തല്ലാറുണ്ടോ, in which case both yes and no are problematic. We are not talking about that. We're talking about possible answers. Even that question has only one answer, yes or no. All right. So yes or no questions. The third type of question which Chomsky talks about is what we call a statement, which is not a question prima facie. When you look at it, it doesn't appear like a question, but it's a question. Such as when I say, you tell me, sir, you're troubling us too much. So I say, I'm troubling you too much, or I'm troubling you too much, which is actually a statement, but by my tone, you understand that it's a question. I'm asking you if I'm really troubling you too much. I'm troubling you too much. I'm troubling you too much. Okay, so instead of saying I'm troubling you too much, which is a plain statement. So when you say I'm troubling you too much by raising my tone, pitch of my voice at the end, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to turn a statement into a question. All right. So these are the three ways of asking questions in all the languages of the world. All the languages of the world have fixed word orders. Okay, which means not fixed word. I'm sorry. All the languages of the world have word orders. Okay, which may be flexible. All right, but there will be a default word order. Okay, so you can change the word order by transformation of sentence, but there will be a default word order, such as Malayalam has subject, verb, object. Raman, subject, object, verb. Raman, Ravanane, Kunnu. Classical example. English has a subject, verb, object structure. Ram killed Ravan. Okay. Arabic might have a verb subject object. Qala Allahu Azza wa Jal. Qala Allahu kun, etc. So other orders are also possible, but these are the three major word order patterns existing in languages. All right. Well, see how narrow this phenomenon called language is constructed. Okay, you have only a few possibilities realized, although the possibilities are immense. Okay, theoretically, you can have hundreds of ways of asking questions, theoretically, but there are only three, which means that there are a limited number of rules, finite number of rules, which are common to all the languages of the world. Okay, so Chomsky did not bother to inquire why this was so. He just described phenomena as he found them. All right, but today we know that all existing languages, human languages, are descended from the same parent language. I have already told you about that. Okay, of a language in Southwest Africa near the Kalahari Desert. It's called Khoisa, Khoisa, spoken by uh, a people called the San Bushmen, SAN. Bushmen are simply a term given by the colonizers. We'll just call them San people. San people who speak a language which linguists say is directly descended from the first language spoken by human beings before they migrated out of Africa. You know all the story. Okay, all of the story. So I'm not going into that. So this means that Chomsky's hypothesis is validated. Yes, if all the languages are descended from the same language, yes, then naturally they'll have a large amount of common grammatical rules. Okay, and as they separate from the body of the parent language, they develop separate rules. You have separate rules for different languages. You have a word order which is different from the word order of the parent language. You have a different combination of words. You can combine a noun and an adjective. The adjective can follow a noun instead of the adjective preceding a noun. Okay, these are differences in properties. Okay, so let's come back to the point. Chomsky said that there is a language acquisition device in the brain which helps you acquire language. How does this happen? This happens when you are exposed to language. You cannot automatically start speaking. There must be a triggering mechanism, which is what we call the language, which is the performance of others in your surroundings. Okay, it need not be your mother or father. Although we call our first language mother tongue, you needn't necessarily acquire it from your mother. You can acquire it from anybody who speaks around you. Okay, even orphans, children who are left in the street after they are born, all of them learn language. Okay, so that's another thing. So what I'm coming to is how children acquire language. They acquire what they are actually learning from others is the lexis of the individual words. That's what they are learning. The grammatical rules they already know. They are watching other people using language, and they are applying the grammatical rules which they already have, which is wired into their brain. Okay, so Chomsky also uses an analogy for this, what he calls the switching mechanism. You have it's like a switchboard with a number of switches. So if you're learning to speak Malayalam, what you do is you switch on the Malayalam switch and you learn Malayalam, because Malayalam is different from English in many of its grammatical rules, although they have a common base of grammatical rules. Okay, so the child listening to people speaking Malayalam decides that this is the language that it's going to learn. So naturally, it switches on this mechanism. It takes some time. Okay, and there is something called trial and error. Okay, what sometimes happens when a child is learning language. The trial and error happens in both lexical items and grammatical rules. For example, a child will say, uh, after listening to his mother telling uh, it, ചോറ് ചിന്തിപ്പോയി മോനെ. Okay. The next day, if a papadam, okay, falls and shatters from its plate, it said, "Ame papadam ചിന്തിപ്പോയി." So, without knowing that the same collocation is not possible with papadam. You cannot say papadam chindi, you say papadam veenu. Okay, rather than choru, uh, uh, rather than chindi. All right. So this is trial and error. Sometimes it might also make grammatical errors. Okay. Okay. അമ്മയ്ക്ക് ചോറ് തരുമോ? Okay, which is rare. Okay, instead of saying എനിക്ക് ചോറ് തരും, which is rare. Which is rare. Okay, or sometimes skipping the grammatical rules altogether. First stage of language acquisition. Okay, the two-word stage. ചോറ്, അമ്മേ ചോറ്, which means the child wants food. ചോറ്. അമ്മേ ചോറ് തരുമോ? Instead of that is a later stage. So the earlier stage, when it is picking up grammar, when it learns the lexis, it tries to shortcut these grammatical constructions by using, uh, by dispensing with grammatical constructions. But later on, it does that. Okay. So this is called trial and error. Trial and error uh, in trial and error in learning languages. Okay. So Chomsky's idea is very clear now, because especially after we learn that all languages are descended from the same parent language. Okay, so this is what. So it's not like what behavior is saying. You pick up language from your surroundings. Yes, you cannot have a word wired into your brain. Okay, you cannot have a word like chore wired into your brain. You only have the grammatical rules. Okay, the structure of the language wired into the your brain. You cannot realize language without knowing how this structure is applied. It's applied through lexis, individual words, which is what you learn from your surroundings. I think this is clear. All right. So Chomsky's notion of uh, language acquisition, how he talked about uh, language being a biological phenomenon, how he explained how acquisition takes place. I think this is very clear. All right. So, so if you know that you can switch on one language, definitely you can switch on more languages. This is very clear. So early in childhood, it's possible to acquire let us say, generally a large number of languages. There are many multilingual children in the world, okay, who live in multilingual environments where many languages are spoken. In Kasaragod, many parts of Kasaragod district, where in the same neighborhood, three, four, or more languages are spoken, children naturally pick up all the languages, especially when they start playing with their friends. All right. So many parts of Kasaragod district have Tulu, Kannada, Malayalam, and a few other dialects as well. Okay, so many children pick up all these as they go. But there is an important qualification to this idea of children being multilingual. Okay, there are what are called language habits. Okay, so if you learn language at an early stage and you continue to use the same language or languages, yeah, more than one, definitely. After a particular stage, learning a new language becomes difficult. Okay, for at least for most people. I'm not saying for all people. There are people who learn languages late in their lives. Okay, in their late youth or middle age, there are quite a few who perform very well. But it's a general case that after your adolescence, okay, you don't pick up a language as easily as you did when you were a baby. Okay, when you were a toddler playing with your friends. So this is the idea. There's a cutoff point, and this I think you have already discovered while you were learning English. It is there's something called first language interference, meaning the habits of using your first language persist when you are learning another language. This is very evidently visible in pronunciation. So, although English pundits tell you, coach you very earnestly to pronounce English like a native English speaker, one discovers that if you are learning English after a particular stage, after your early childhood, uh, I'm not saying always, but quite often. Okay, more often than not, you're not successful because your first language interferes. Okay, so for many people, to use the voiced consonant z in English, okay, and to distinguish something like icy from eyes, where the consonant is z, not s. For many people, it's difficult. Okay. It may be possible to distinguish between z and s in certain contexts, but especially because the consonant z is not a part of Malayalam phonology, if you're learning to speak. So at the very primary level, you have problem. So not to speak about other collocational problems, such as when you try to uh, collocate words. I heard a French national telling me she was speaking to me about her nephew who was of same age as me. This happened long ago. So he was of marriageable age, past marriageable age, in fact, 33. But he's still not married. So she was his aunt, and she had come down from France, a Eurasian. Her father was French and her mother Indian, who belonged to Mahi. So as we were chatting, she said, look, does he have any friend girls? And I didn't get it at first, but then I understood what she was driving at. She was asking me whether her nephew had any girlfriends. So in French, the adjective comes after the noun. Okay, in many words, and some of the collocations have persisted in English. For example, you can have a combination like advocate general. Okay, right. The word general is the adjective, but in this construction, it comes after advocate, which is the head word. All right. So that is how it is in French. In English, the adjective normally comes before the noun. All right. So this is your problem, second problem. When you have first language interference, you misconstruct your sentences, putting a word which ought to have come uh, after the other word uh, before it, or vice versa. All right. So you have problems in phonology, in grammar, as we saw, in morphology, how to uh, use affixes and prefixes. Okay, whether you should use a particle for continuous tense, etc., etc. So all this confusion arises because you use a language which has a different structure, which has a different properties. So this is called first language interference. Yeah, so this is what linguistics tells you, that this is very common. There's nothing to worry about. You're not a bad learner in any case. But it so happens that this particular uh, language that you're trying to learn is different from the language or languages which you have already learned in early childhood. And the habits that you have formed, the habits that you continue to uh, use, continue to exercise, stands in the way of acquiring this new language. This is fine. All right. So, similarly, when you are trying to understand things like bilingualism, yeah, closely connected to what I was just saying. So, uh, as I said, in early childhood, you can learn uh, many languages. Linguistics also tells us that a person who is in command of two or more languages can use them normally without mixing them up. All right. If a person is fluent in two languages or more, you can easily use them without mixing. You don't mix up languages. This is very clearly observable in children. So when children use one language and suddenly they see a friend of theirs who speak another language, they very easily switch over to the other language without mixing them up. So my child, when we were in Pondicherry, which is a Tamil-speaking area, so he used to make such sudden switches. So he would say, "Poi sonna siripanga" to his friends who were Tamil, and immediately, if we were around, he would translate the sentence to us. "Kallatharam parnja chirikkule." So see the differences, slight differences in the construction. Okay. So in the Tamil sentence, it's a statement. And in this Malayalam sentence, it appears like a question, but it's a statement, all right. So see the way the child has, my son in this case, has constructed the two sentences differently, effortlessly. That's the point, effortlessly, without making an effort, as many of us have to when we are using a different language. So this effortless construction of a language is what qualifies you to be a bilingual or a multilingual. You have several languages at your command. But this is very important. Linguistics also tells you that if you have an inadequate command of a language, a second language, you tend to mix up languages. This is called code mixing. Okay. So code switching, which we saw now, can be the result of your the sudden change in the linguistic environment. The speaker of another language appears before you, and you know the language, so you switch over to his or her language. Code switching. You also switch over to a language for reasons of prestige. Okay, so speaking English is considered to be a status symbol. Okay, matter of social status. So while you're speaking Malayalam, suddenly you switch over to English. Okay, as we say, "Puttinu thenga idugga." Okay, as suddenly in between you switch over to English. Although you cannot quite often maintain that uh, new uh, the performance in the new language that you are switching over to. You break off again and switch back to Malayalam. So in Malayalam films, you see plenty of such instances where characters who are not very fluent in English but who want to show off sometimes tries to switch over, and what they do is not uh, code switching as they had probably intended to do. What they do is code mixing. Okay, so please go to the pachakari shop. Okay, this is not an imaginary sentence. I have actually heard this from an Anglo-Indian. Okay, who so I mean familiar with Malayalam, growing up in an entirely Malayalam-speaking environment and occasionally mixing up language. Okay, okay. Can you get some agoli from the market? You'd say. Probably not knowing the English word for agoli. So code mixing is quite common. Code mixing occurs when your command of the second language is not perfect. When you need to supplement your knowledge of one language with uh, items from another language. So these two phenomena, code switching and code mixing, are quite common in the world, right? Now, okay, so I haven't come to the most important part yet. That is, if this is the case, if languages are acquired naturally, so to speak, by switching on a particular switch on a switchboard of languages, why are we still learning a new language, English or Hindi, whatever new language you are learning, in such an awkward manner? Okay, you are learning, you are being taught grammatical structures. You are being taught that you should say "I am" rather than "I is," etc. So this grammar learning, okay, there used to be a method called grammar translation method. Okay, when you used to substitute the the structure of one language for another to learn languages. So in many schools, in almost all schools, languages are not learned the natural way as they ought to be learned. Okay. So how do you go about it? You introduce the learners to a set of uh, sentences in context. Okay. So you try to uh, evoke in them a particular sense of language by which, even if they don't know all the words, they infer what it is. Okay. So when you say something like, "I have just returned from Chennai." Okay. So, if learners are not aware of what just return, they might be aware of return or have come back from Chennai. Have just come back from. So, what does this just mean? So, one must leave them to understand this from the context. Okay. So why didn't you call me yesterday? Okay. So why didn't you call me? So the other person says, I have just returned from Chennai. That's why I didn't call you. So I didn't return yesterday. I didn't return, you say, last week, etc. So this is how you learn language. Okay. Just as you have learned your first language from the context. Okay. From trying to so this is the ideal way. And then if at all it's necessary, I don't think that teaching grammar is necessary at all, honestly. Okay. It's necessary only for linguists. Okay. So if you're learning linguistics, yes, you should learn how a language is constructed. If you're learning language, there is no point in learning grammar. Okay. For correction, perhaps, and that too indirectly, not by saying that this is an adjective, but by saying that this is how it happens. Okay. When you say girlfriend, for example, what you are doing is these two words can be combined, but the girl has to come first. Okay. So this you make your learners understand by combining a large number of sentences. Schoolmaster, okay, headmaster, okay, street light, where all the compounds have two words. The first word serving as the adjective and the last word serving as the head word. Okay. So here, by analyzing data, by uh, by looking at how language functions, by looking at how language is used in context, learners get to know the principles by which this language is held together, its structure. So this would mean that most of what we do in our schools, as far as language teaching, learning. Okay, in fact, in Russian, these two words are have a single word. You have when you say obichenia, it means teaching, learning, both things together. Okay, the process of learning in which there is a teacher, or you may teach yourself, and in that through that process you learn. So teaching, learn. I would say teaching, learn. So in teaching, learning a language, the principle, the process that ought to be applied is not what it is in most schools in the country, Kerala especially. So grammatical principles are in fact not to be learned at all. You have to access a language by simply uh, learning unconsciously how it is structured, just as you have learned your first language by getting exposed to it and making rational analysis on the basis of rules which are already wired into your brain. I think you get the point. All right. So this is how linguistics, the principles of linguistics, helps us as not students of English. We are now students of linguistics. We are looking at this science, this discipline called linguistics, how it explains some of the things we were not aware of before. All right. Now, a few more things. Yeah. Now, a large number of other things like what we find in society, language and society, are also explicated in linguistics, such as I start off by saying that you learn, you pick up language from your surroundings, lexis, words, individual words from your surroundings, and apply the principles of language, the structure of language is already wired into your brain. Fine. One must also say that, slightly, I mean, uh, explaining it a little more, and say that language is also picked up through social interaction. Okay. I think I used the word exposure, but it's also picked up through social interaction, meaning as a matter of necessity. not simply a natural, spontaneous process. Okay, this happens when you are working, for example, in a linguistic environment you are not familiar with. There, learning this language is a vital necessity. So I think the first clip I sent you, if you remember, talked about the origin of language. Why did language originate? Language originated because human beings who lived, human beings who uh, human beings who existed at a particular period of time, 70,000 to 1 lakh years ago, they needed language to carry out their day-to-day activities. All right, so that's why they kind of produced, they created what's called language through social interaction. I've already told you about the hunters who needed language to carry out their hunting activities, every single detail, okay, which had to be passed on from one hunter to another. A complex series of science. All right. So this is why they uh, created language. So when we talk about social interaction as a means of learning language, just think of people who work in another part of the country. A uh, vegetable vendor working, selling his wares in Chennai. I've heard of that market, Coimbatore market, which was the epicenter of an outbreak of COVID-19 in Chennai, and which was closed for some quite for it still remains closed. So imagine, forget about COVID. We are talking about a vendor, Malayali vegetable vendor in Coimbatore, okay, or a Malayali hotelier in Coimbatore, runs a small restaurant. Okay, so it's a vital necessity that he learns Tamil. Yeah, so this he does through interaction with people in the neighborhood. Okay, so social interaction as a means of learning language, whereas you picked up Malayalam not through such vital necessity. Okay, you would have picked it up anyway because you live in a Malayalam speaking environment. You live in a home where people speak Malayalam. Whereas in this case of the vegetable vendor uh, operating in Chennai, or a hotelier running his restaurant in Coimbatore, learning this language is vital necessity. Okay, and so social interaction, I think, is the next outward reach that a language learner has. Okay, so you can also think about children who are admitted in schools where most of their peers speak another language. Okay, same situation. A young boy or girl a Malayali boy or girl who studies in Bangalore, for example. Okay, because her parents happen to be working in Bangalore, so they have relocated to Bangalore, joined the school there, and the learning Kannada is a vital necessity for these children. Okay, and they do it. So social interaction as a key to learning language. This we mustn't forget. That's how the very phenomenon of language originated. All right. So I think I've given you a rough idea of how linguistics, the principles of linguistics, helps you to understand a phenomenon like language acquisition. You learn many minor details about this. I think I've given you a brief outline of how this happens on the basis of linguistics theory, starting with behaviorism. Okay, then moving on to the innate theory of language acquisition. Okay, bye. Meet again.